At some point in your life, you've probably come across the expression, you are the five people that you hang around with. I think it was Jim Rohn, the personal development speaker, that first started talking about this. Anyway, there's a lot of truth to this saying because our brains are wired to adapt to our social environment. You could say we're all products of our environment. And if you want proof of this, just listen to how somebody speaks. And I'm actually a perfect example of this because if you look at me, you'll probably look at me and you'll be able to tell just by looking at my skin color that my roots are Indian. But the fact is that there's nothing actually Indian about me. I was raised in a small working class town in England. I'm very much English. If you was to put me in India, the locals over there wouldn't accept me as being Indian. So this just shows how powerful your environment actually is. It shapes you as a person. And before I move on to the talking points, also worth mentioning here is that your environment isn't just the people that you hang around with in the real world. It's also the people that you follow on social media as well. Because whether you like to admit it or not, they are influencing you for better or for worse. So let's get into the main talking points of this video. A really good way to explain this is to use a sporting example because a sporting example is what a lot of guys will relate to. So just imagine for a second, right? You've got a soccer player, and this soccer player is playing for a mid-table team. So they're never at the top, but at the same time, they're never at the bottom. Season after season after season after season, they finish mid-table. But what happens is that a team at the top end of the table sees a bit of potential in one of the players that is playing for this mid-table team, so they sign him up. And what you notice after his settling period is that after about 5 or 6 months, you notice a major improvement in this player while he's playing for this top end team. And his natural ability hasn't changed. What's changed is his environment. He's playing better now because he's around better coaches. He's around better players. The expectations in this group are much higher. So, in other words, his environment forced him to improve. It was nothing to do with his natural ability. And this makes perfect sense because attitudes, behaviors, and mindsets do rub off on people. If you hang around with a bunch of people that are winning all the time, that will rub off on you. And vice versa. Hang around with a bunch of people that are losing all the time, and again, that will rub off on you. The people that you hang around with is so important. If you actually look at the word culture, the word cult is in there. Culture. And this is telling, to be honest, because if you look at people from different social class backgrounds, different subcultures, and even religions, what you'll tend to notice is that they tend to dress the same way, talk the same way, and act the same way. Like I said in the intro of this video, we are all products of our environment. So, for example purposes, when I was in school, right, there were two dominant subcultures. You had the chavs on one side and you had the moshes and goths on another. And for those outside of the UK, a chav is basically somebody who's, I know I'm stereotyping here, but they generally come from low income backgrounds and they tend to engage in antisocial behaviour. Music wise, they're listening to hardcore dance music, drum and bass, or hip hop. Clothing wise, they're wearing sportswear. Your moshers, on the other hand, were into metal music. They tend to have piercings, they tend to grow their hair long, they tend to wear baggy clothing and dress in all black. When I was in school, those were the two dominant subcultures. And I know a lot of people might say it's a bit old fashioned what I'm saying, that I am stereotyping, but to be fair, You can tell a lot about a person by the people that they hang around with. Because people at the end of the day tend to hang around with people that are similar to themselves. This is just human nature. There's a lot of truth to the saying that birds of a feather flock together. What you'll tend to find is that as you grow older and become a lot more comfortable in your own skin, is that the need and drive to fit in subsides. It's still there, it never really goes, but it's nowhere near as strong as, let's say, what it was when you was a kid or a teenager. Like most lads can probably agree with me when I say this, and that is sometimes, especially when you're a teenager, you'll do stupid things just to be accepted by the group. We've all been there. We basically all want to fit in. And if you look at this from an evolutionary psychology perspective, it's basically a survival mechanism because what would happen, right, when we were hunter gatherers, if the group abandoned us, we'd probably die. So it's in our best interest to be a part of a group. And this is why kids, especially, will do dumb shit to be accepted by the peers. I touched on this in the first point when I was talking about that soccer player initially playing for a mid-table team, then moving to another team that's higher up the table, and then basically improving. It's basically the power of proximity. Because he's around better players, it improves him. But let's use another example to drill this home, and that is, right, you could have a poor person that's been poor for a large period of his life, right? And let's say you put that poor person around 5 rich people. And let's say he spends a significant amount of time with these rich people. What would probably end up happening is that poor person would probably end up changing. He would probably end up becoming rich himself. Because, like I said earlier, mindsets, values, attitudes, behaviors, etc., are contagious. And this works both ways. For example purposes, you could have a guy that's never done drugs in his life, never drank, basically has lived a clean, healthy life, and then you put him around people that drink and take drugs on a regular basis, I'm pretty sure that that guy would probably start drinking and maybe start doing drugs just because of the people that he's hanging around with. Just think about it for a second. In that drinking and drug culture environment, that's the standard behavior. That's that's the behavior that gets you accepted within that group. You are the people that you hang around with, and you're also the people that you follow on social media. So it's just something to be very mindful of.